What did Active Directory say to the LDAP service when LDAP got buzzed off of a single drink? And the answer? What a lightweight. In this nugget, I'd like to take a look at the default ports involved with Lightweight Directory Access Protocol and prepare our lab environment so that you and I can then start using the tools to do enumeration leveraging LDAP. If you and I were doing a scan of the network and one of the systems came back and reported that TCP port 389 was open and available, we know basically two things from that. Number one, it's an LDAP service that's listening on that port. And secondly, in a Microsoft environment, it's going to be a system that's connected to Active Directory. Because oftentimes a Windows machine that's running Active Directory will also have LDAP services running. And then other systems that want to use a centralized database from the Windows Active Directory, one of the options they can use is LDAP to make requests into Active Directory, for example, to verify a user account. Now, port 389 is plain text, and it's a little bit risky because if we have a device that's making an LDAP query and we're sending over the username and the password associated with that request, because it's in plain text, anybody eavesdropping the network or doing a man-in-the-middle attack who can then see that traffic then knows the credentials, the username and password that can be used for those LDAP queries. Now, to help control that, we could also use encryption. And when using encryption for confidentiality with our LDAP requests, it uses TCP port 636. And those are the default ports, unencrypted 389 and encrypted using 636. So in our lab environment, one of the challenges we have is that we don't have LDAP services running yet. So what I'd like to do is let's prepare our Windows 2012 server, this bad boy right there, and let's do a couple things. We'll install the LDAP services. I'll walk you through it step by step. We'll also promote this guy to be a domain controller. And let's use the domain called nuglab.local. And for the NetBIOS name, if I can spell it correctly, it's going to be nuglab. And then the third step is once we've converted this to a domain controller, and we've enabled LDAP services, let's do a quick port scan just to verify that port 389 is open and listening on that server. So here in VMware Workstation, let's fire off our Windows 2012 server. We'll start it. I've also got the Linux box up and running, and we can use that just to do a quick port scan using Nmap, just to verify that port 389 is up and available on our Windows 2012 server at .212. So let's start off on the 2012 server. We'll go full screen and we'll do a Control-Alt-Insert to go ahead and send a Control-Alt-Delete to log on. We'll supply the credentials for the administrator and press Enter. It's going to bring up Server Manager by default. We're going to go to Manage up in the top right-hand corner of Server Manager, and we're going to select from the drop-down Add Roles and Features. We're going to click Next a few times just to tell it that we're going to manage this local server. And what we want to do here is we're going to add Active Directory Domain Services. It's going to add a bunch of additional tools as well. We'll click Add Features. And we're also going to add Active Directory Lightweight Directory Services. And click on Add Features. So effectively, we've added a check here and accepted the defaults for the additional services it's going to add. And we'll click on Next to continue. So we'll click on Next, and we'll click on Next again, and Next again, and Next again, and we're going to click on Install. So the install is done. It's letting us know that we have some additional steps to make this a domain controller, so we can click here to promote it. So we'll go ahead and click on that hyperlink to promote it to a domain controller. We're going to say we're going to add a new forest because I'm not going to join an existing one. For the root domain name, I'm going to use nuglab.local and click on Next. Next, it wants a password for directory services restore mode. I'm going to use the lab password of nugget, !23 with the capital N, and I'll confirm it. And click on Next. It's giving me a message about delegation for the DNS server. I'm going to go ahead and say thanks and click on Next. It's recommending the NetBIOS domain name of nuglab, which looks perfect. So we'll use that. We'll click Next. I'm going to accept the default file locations and click Next, and then click Next to continue. It's going to go through and check for prerequisites, and then we'll click on Install, and that's going to trigger a reboot of the server as well. So we'll go ahead and let all of that happen. So it just rebooted, it's on its way back up, and then we'll log in as administrator. So we'll log in as administrator. And now that that's back up and running, let's go over to our Kali Linux box and do a quick scan just to verify whether or not TCP port 389 is up and available and listening on that Windows 2012 server. So we'll go over to our Kali Linux box, we'll bring it full screen, and let's open up a shell, and from the command line, let's run nmap. So we'll do nmap space -s for the type of scan. Let's do a TCP scan, so capital T. Let's do a dash capital O. And just as a reminder, that'll help us to discover the operating system that's running on that platform. And then we'll put in the target IP address of that Windows 2012 server, which is 192.168.1.212, and we'll press enter. And it is done. It took about 4 seconds. And if we scroll up a little bit, and we have this guy, 389, which is LDAP. And we also have 636, which is LDAP that's using SSL for the encryption. So in spite of what Obi-Wan Kenobi says, these are the droids that we're looking for. So that just verifies that LDAP services are indeed running. In this nugget, you and I have done 3 basic things. We identified the ports used by LDAP, we prepared our Windows 2012 server, and we also verified that those ports are now open on that 2012 server in our lab environment. And we'll start using enumeration tools with LDAP in our next nugget. Meanwhile, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.